Commander Elena Vasquez gripped the plasma rifle tighter as another explosion rocked the diplomatic station. Through the reinforced viewport, she could see the massive forms of the Corvathi fleet surrounding their small outpost like predators circling wounded prey. The sleek, bioorganic ships pulsed with an otherworldly light, their living hulls breathing in a vacuum of space. "Status report," Elena called out, her voice cutting through the chaos of the command center. Around her, alien diplomats from 17 different species huddled together, their various forms of terror remarkably similar despite their vastly different biologies. Lieutenant Chun looked up from his console, sweat beading on his forehead. "Ma'am, they've disabled our main engines and knocked out long-range communications. We're dead in the water." The Zephyrian ambassador, a tall, crystalline being whose body chimed softly with each movement, stepped forward. "Commander, with respect, perhaps it would be wise to surrender. The Corvathi are known for their efficiency in dealing with resistance." Elena turned to face the assembled diplomatic corps. The emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the diverse group. The insectoid Thrix delegation clicking nervously, the gaseous nebulans swirling anxiously in their containment suits, and the leonine Vorthack growling low in their throats. All of them looked at her with a mixture of hope and resignation. "The Corvathi don't take prisoners," Elena said simply. "You all know this. They came here because this station represents something they can't tolerate: peaceful cooperation between species they consider inferior." The Thrix Queenspeaker's mandibles clicked rapidly. "But surely there must be some accommodation we can reach. Humans are newcomers to the galactic stage. You cannot possibly understand the full extent of Corvathi power." Elena almost smiled at that. Newcomers. That what they all called humanity, the young species that had barely crawled out of their home system 50 years ago. They saw humans as naive, idealistic, and woefully unprepared for the harsh realities of galactic politics. In some ways, they were right. Humanity had arrived in the galaxy with grand dreams of peaceful exploration and mutual cooperation, only to discover that the universe was far more brutal than their most pessimistic philosophers had imagined. The Corvathi Empire controlled nearly a third of the galaxy, their expansion fueled by a simple philosophy: might makes right, and only the strong deserve to survive. They had crushed dozens of civilizations, enslaved countless species, and turned entire star systems into monuments to their own power. Most species learned to submit quickly. Those that didn't cease to exist. "I understand more than you think," Elena said quietly. "I was at Kepler 442 when they glassed the colony there. 3 million beings, mostly refugees from their previous conquests. The Corvathi didn't even demand surrender. They just erased them." The command center fell silent, except for the distant rumble of the station's failing systems. Elena could see the memory of that day reflected in the eyes of several ambassadors. They had all heard the reports, seen the aftermath. Kepler 442 had been intended as a symbol of interspecies cooperation, a joint colony where different races could work together. The Corvathi had made it a cautionary tale instead. "The communication array is still functional on short range," Chin reported. "They're hailing us. Put them through." The main display flickered to life, revealing the bridge of a Corvathi dreadnought. The being that appeared was everything the galaxy had learned to fear. Nearly 3 meters tall, covered in chitinous armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws. Its face was a nightmare fusion of reptilian and insectoid features, with multifaceted eyes that gleamed with cold intelligence. "I am War Prime Kethera of the Corvathi 3rd Conquest Fleet," the creature said, its voice a harmonic growl that seemed to vibrate through the station's hull. "You will surrender the station and submit to processing. You have 1 standard time unit to comply." "This is Commander Elena Vasquez of the Terran Federation," Elena replied, stepping into view. "This station is protected under the Galactic Accords as neutral diplomatic territory. Your attack is a violation of Dash. Kethra's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. The galactic accords are words on paper, human. They have no power here. The strong rule, the weak serve or die. This is the natural order. Natural order? Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, but the calm that came before action. You want to talk about natural order? Let me tell you something about humans, Kethra. We're persistence hunters. Back on our homeworld, our ancestors didn't have claws or fangs or armor. We had something better. We never gave up. The War Prime's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Brave words from such a small species. Your entire military could not stand against a single conquest fleet. You're probably right, Elena admitted. But here's the thing about humans. We don't always need to win to succeed. Sometimes we just need to make the victory too expensive. She turned to her crew. Chun, prepare the reactor core for overload. Maximum dispersal pattern. The lieutenant's eyes widened. Ma'am, that would Dash. I know what it would do. Elena's voice was steady. Everyone else, emergency evacuation protocols. Get to the escape pods. Commander Vasquez, the Vorthack ambassador rumbled. Surely you cannot be serious. This is madness. Maybe, Elena said, checking her sidearm. But it's human madness, and that makes all the difference. On the screen, War Prime Kethra leaned forward. You would destroy yourself rather than submit? This serves no purpose. Your death accomplishes nothing, doesn't it? Elena smiled, and for the first time since the attack began, she felt truly calm. Every species in this galaxy has learned to kneel before the Korvathi. But humans? We have this annoying habit of standing up when we're supposed to stay down. The evacuation alarms began to wail as the diplomatic staff hurried toward the escape pods. Some of them looked back at Elena with confusion, others with something that might have been respect. She knew most of them would survive. The Korvathi might be brutal, but they weren't wasteful. They would capture the evacuees, question them, possibly even recruit some of them. But they would also spread the story of what happened here. Final warning, human, Kethra growled. Surrender or face obliteration. Elena walked to the weapons locker and pulled out something that made several of the remaining ambassadors gasp. A simple steel sword, worn and battle-scarred with a grip wrapped in leather. It had belonged to her great-grandfather, a soldier in one of Earth's last great wars. She had carried it through every engagement since joining the Federation military, more as a reminder than a weapon. You know what the difference is between humans and every other species you've conquered? Elena asked, hefting the ancient blade. They fought to survive. We fight because it's the right thing to do. She turned to Chun. Initiate the overload sequence. 5-minute timer. Elena, the Zephyrian ambassador, chimed urgently. This is futile. Your sacrifice will be forgotten within a generation. Will it? Elena looked at the assembled diplomats, representing dozens of worlds and billions of beings. Or will you remember that when it mattered, when faced with impossible odds and certain death, a human chose to stand and fight rather than kneel and beg? The reactor core began to hum with increasing intensity. Through the viewports, Elena could see the Korvathi fleet repositioning, their sensors undoubtedly detecting the energy buildup. They would have enough time to retreat to a safe distance, but they would lose their prize, the station, and all its intelligence value. War Prime Kethra stood slowly, all four arms tensing. You think your defiance matters, human? You think it changes anything? I think, Elena said, drawing the ancient sword and letting its blade catch the light, that every time someone stands up to a bully, it matters. Every single time, even if they lose. She could see something in the War Prime's multifaceted eyes, not fear, exactly, but a flicker of something the Korvathi rarely encountered, uncertainty. For 300 years, they had swept across the galaxy, and every species had eventually submitted. They had built their empire on the assumption that all intelligent life would choose survival over principle when faced with overwhelming force. The escape pods began launching, carrying the diplomatic staff to safety. Elena watched them go, knowing that each pod carried something more valuable than the individuals inside. They carried a story. A story about a human who chose to fight rather than surrender, who valued principle over survival. 3 minutes to core breach, Chen reported. Ma'am, we need to go. Elena nodded. Get to the pods, Lieutenant. That's an order. What about you? She hefted the sword again, feeling the weight of generations of human warriors who had faced impossible odds. Someone needs to make sure our guests get the full experience. On the screen, War Prime Kethera's form began to shift and grow, his bio-armor extending into blade-like projections. If you wish to die by the sword, human, I will oblige you. But first, you will witness the fall of your people. My people, Elena laughed, and it was a sound full of genuine warmth despite the circumstances. Kethera, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Humans don't just have people. We make family out of strangers, allies out of enemies, and heroes out of ordinary individuals who just refuse to quit. The War Prime's image flickered as interference from the overloading reactor began to disrupt communications. Your species will learn to kneel, as all others have. No, Elena said simply, raising the ancient blade in salute. We really won't. The screen went dark as the communication array, finally, failed. Elena was alone now, standing in a command center lit only by emergency lights and the growing glow from the reactor core. Through the viewports, she could see the Korvathi fleet beginning to withdraw, their sensors warning them of the impending explosion. She thought about Earth, about the billions of humans who had never seen an alien world but who would hear this story someday. She thought about the diplomatic staff in their escape pods, carrying the tale of humanity's first real stand against the Korvathi Empire. Most of all, she thought about her great-grandfather and all the other soldiers who had faced impossible odds with nothing but courage and an ancient code that said some things were worth dying for. The reactor core's hum became a roar. Warning lights bathed everything in red. Elena stood straight, the sword held ready, and smiled. Somewhere in the retreating Korvathi fleet, War Prime Kethera watched the station's final moments through his ship's sensors. He had conquered 73 worlds, enslaved 42 species, and never once encountered resistance that confused him as much as this single human's defiance. The station exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the surrounding space like a newborn star. When the light faded, nothing remained but expanding debris and the memory of a species that chose to fight rather than surrender. In the escape pods, 17 different species sat in stunned silence, each processing what they had witnessed in their own way. The Zephyrian ambassador's crystalline form chimed a low, mournful note. The Thrix Queen Speaker's mandibles clicked in what her species reserved for honoring the dead. Even the proud Vorthak bowed, their great heads in acknowledgement of courage they had never expected to see. But it was the young Nebular in their containment suit who spoke the words that would echo across the galaxy in the years to come. The human raised her sword, and even the dragon bent in respect. None of them knew it yet, but they had just witnessed the beginning of something that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The Korvathi had built their empire on the assumption that all intelligent life would eventually submit to superior force. They had never encountered a species that would choose certain death over surrender, that would value principle over survival. They had never met humanity, and in the depths of space, War Prime Kethera stared at the expanding debris field and felt something his species had never taught him to understand: doubt. For the first time in his long career of conquest, he wondered if the Korvathi might have finally met their match. The war for the galaxy's soul had begun, and it would be fought not with superior weapons or larger fleets, but with something far more dangerous: the human refusal to accept that might makes right. The dragon had bent in respect, but the real question was whether it would learn to bow. 6 months after the destruction of Diplomatic Station Harmony, the story of Commander Elena Vasquez had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. In the crystal spires of the Zephyrian homeworld, her name was sung in harmonic frequencies that resonated with courage. On the insectoid worlds of the Thrix Collective, her defiance was encoded into their genetic memory banks as a new paradigm of resistance. Even among the proud warrior clans of Vorthak Prime, grizzled veterans spoke her name with something approaching reverence. Captain Marcus Chun stood on the bridge of the Earth Federation vessel Indomitable, watching the tactical display with growing concern. The ship that bore his name was one of humanity's newest and most advanced vessels, but compared to the Korvathi war machine approaching their position, it might as well have been built from cardboard and good intentions. "Sir, they're broadcasting on all frequencies," reported Communications Officer Sarah Kim. "War Prime Kethra is requesting to speak with you personally." Marcus nodded grimly. He had expected this. Ever since Harmony Station, the Korvathi had been hunting human vessels with a dedication that bordered on obsession. They had never before encountered a species that chose destruction over surrender, and it had shaken something fundamental in their understanding of the galaxy. "Put him through, Lieutenant." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the now familiar form of War Prime Kethra. The massive Korvathi looked exactly as Marcus remembered from the intelligence briefings: 3 meters of chitinous armor, for blade-tipped arms, and multifaceted eyes that held the cold intelligence of a perfect predator. But there was something different this time, a tension in his posture that suggested the destruction of Harmony Station had affected him more than he cared to admit. "Captain Chun," Kethra said, his harmonic growl carrying across the void between their ships. "I know of you. You served under the human commander who chose death over submission." "I did," Marcus replied evenly. "Elena Vasquez was my commanding officer, and one of the finest people I've ever known." "She was a fool," Kethra stated, but there was something in his tone that suggested even he didn't entirely believe it. "Her death accomplished nothing. Your species continues to resist the inevitable." Marcus looked around his bridge. Unlike the diverse diplomatic staff at Harmony Station, his crew was entirely human. But they represented something just as powerful: the next generation of humanity's expansion into the galaxy. Lieutenant Kim, barely 25 years old, had volunteered for this mission knowing it was likely a one-way trip. Engineer Patel had left behind a wife and 2 children on Earth to help design the Indomitable's revolutionary systems. Dr. Reyes had abandoned a comfortable research position to serve as the ship's chief science officer. Each of them had made the choice to be here, knowing the risks. Each of them carried forward the same spark that had driven Elena Vasquez to draw her sword in the face of impossible odds. "War Prime," Marcus said slowly, "I think you misunderstood what happened at Harmony Station. Elena didn't die for nothing. She died to prove a point." Kethra's mandibles clicked in what might have been irritation. "And what point was that, human?" "That some things are worth more than survival." The War Prime leaned forward, his bio-armor rippling with barely contained aggression. "Survival is all that matters. This is the first law of nature, the foundation of evolution, the basis of all intelligent thought. Your commander's death proved only that humans are defective." Marcus almost smiled. "Do you know what humans call someone who gives up their life for their principles, War Prime? We call them heroes. And we tell their stories to our children so they'll know how to be brave when their time comes. Courage without purpose is merely suicide." "Is it?" Marcus gestured to his crew. "Every person on this ship volunteered to be here. Every human world we visited in the past 6 months has offered to send more ships, more crews, more volunteers. Elena's death didn't end anything. It started something." He could see the confusion in Kethra's multifaceted eyes. The Korvathi had built their empire on fear and submission. They understood conquest and domination, but the concept of willing sacrifice for an ideal was foreign to their nature. "You came here to destroy us," Marcus continued. "But you're not facing the same species you met at Harmony Station. We've changed, War Prime. Elena's example showed us something about ourselves we'd forgotten." "And what is that?" "That we're not just another species trying to survive in a hostile galaxy. We're human, and That means something. The Indomitable shuddered as Kethra's flagship powered up its weapons. Around them, the Korvathi battle group moved into attack formation, 12 vessels against their single ship. The odds were even worse than they had been at Harmony Station. You speak of change, Kethra said, but you will die just as easily as any other species. Maybe, Marcus agreed, but we won't die quietly. He turned to his tactical officer. Mr. Rodriguez, target their flagship's primary weapon systems. Full spread of quantum torpedoes. Sir, Rodriguez hesitated. Our weapons can't penetrate their bioarmor. I know. Fire anyway. The Indomitable's torpedoes streaked across space, impacting harmlessly against the Korvathi flagship's hull. The bioarmor absorbed the energy effortlessly, the living metal actually seeming to grow stronger from the attack. Kethra's laugh was like breaking crystal. Your weapons are useless against us, human. Surrender now, and I will make your deaths quick. Counteroffer, Marcus said. You withdraw your fleet, and we won't have to embarrass you in front of your subordinates. The War Prime's form stiffened with rage. You dare mock me? I have conquered systems. I have enslaved entire civilizations. I am the voice of the Korvathi Empire, and I'm just a human with a stubborn streak and a really good engineer. Marcus nodded to Dr. Reyes, who began entering commands into her console. The Indomitable systems hummed with increasing energy as previously inactive systems came online. War Prime, Marcus said conversationally, there's something you should know about humans. We're really good at learning from our mistakes. Elena proved that we could choose courage over survival. But she also taught us that noble gestures need to accomplish something practical. What are you talking about? Dr. Reyes, would you explain to our guest what we've been doing for the past 6 months? The science officer looked up from her console, her dark eyes bright with excitement. Certainly, Captain. War Prime Kethra, are you familiar with the concept of harmonic resonance? The Korvathi's multifaceted eyes focused on her. Explain. Every material has a natural frequency at which it vibrates. Find a right frequency, apply enough energy, and you can make anything shake itself apart. Wine glasses, buildings. She smiled. Bioarmor. Kethra's form went very still. That is impossible. Our armor is living tissue, constantly adapting and evolving. It cannot be affected by simple harmonic resonance. You're right, Dr. Reyes admitted. Simple harmonic resonance wouldn't work. But what about complex harmonic resonance? Multiple frequencies, precisely modulated, targeted at the specific bioelectric patterns that control your armor's adaptation. The War Prime's mandibles began clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation that Marcus had learned to recognize from intelligence reports. Around them, the Korvathi battle group started to spread out, their sensors detecting the unusual energy patterns emanating from the Indomitable. 6 months, Marcus said quietly. 6 months of analyzing every piece of debris from Harmony Station. 6 months of studying Korvathi technology from capture vessels. 6 months of the finest human minds working around the clock to solve one simple problem. How do you kill something that's supposedly unkillable? Impossible, Kethra repeated, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Dr. Reyes, please demonstrate. The science officer pressed a final sequence of commands. The Indomitable's main deflector array began to glow with an eerie blue light, and across the void of space, a complex pattern of energy washed over the Korvathi fleet. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, sections of bioarmor on the nearest vessel began to ripple and distort. The living metal that had seemed so invincible started to convulse. Its adaptive properties turned against itself by the precise harmonic frequencies. Fascinating, Dr. Reyes murmured, watching her instruments. The bioelectric feedback is causing a cascade failure in their adaptive systems. The armor is essentially trying to adapt to contradictory stimuli simultaneously. One of the smaller Korvathi vessels suddenly, vented atmosphere as its bioarmor began to dissolve. Emergency systems activated, sealing the breaches, but the damage was already visible. Sections of the ship's hull were reverting to their base organic state, soft and vulnerable. Warprime Kethera's own flagship shuddered as its bioarmor began to fail. "This is not possible," he growled, but his voice carried a note of something the Korvathi rarely experienced: fear. "Warprime," Marcus said, his tone almost gentle, "there's something else you should understand about humans. We don't just fight to prove points. We fight to win." The harmonic assault continued, systematically stripping away the Korvathi fleet's primary defensive systems. Marcus watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The energy requirements were enormous. The Indomitable could maintain this assault for perhaps 10 minutes before its reactors reached critical overload. But 10 minutes would be enough. "You want to know what Elena Vasquez really accomplished?" Marcus continued. "She bought us time. Time to study you. Time to understand you. Time to find your weaknesses. Every species you've conquered fell because they fought you on your terms. Elena showed us that sometimes the only way to win is to change the rules of the game." Kethera's image flickered as a ship's systems struggled with the cascade failure in their bioarmor. "This changes nothing. The Empire has thousands of vessels. Even if you destroy this fleet, others will come." "Yes, they will," Marcus agreed. "And we'll be ready for them too. Because that's another thing about humans. Warprime, we share information. Every human world, every human ship, every human scientist now has the data we've collected here. Your bioarmor isn't invincible anymore." Around them, the Korvathi battle group was in full retreat. Their vessels, stripped of their primary defenses, were no match for the Indomitable's conventional weapons. 2 ships were already dead in space, their crews evacuating in small pods. The others were limping away at best speed, their bioarmor slowly regenerating, but still vulnerable. "This is not over," Kethera snarled, his flagship's engines flaring as it began to retreat. "The Empire will adapt. We will overcome this setback." "I'm sure you'll try," Marcus said. "But here's the thing you still don't understand about humans. We're not just another species you can conquer and move on. We're a problem that gets worse the more you ignore it." The Warprime's image began to fade as distance and interference degraded the signal. But his final words carried clearly across space. "Your species will learn to fear the Korvathi, human. This I promise you. And your species will learn why humans don't stay down," Marcus replied to the empty screen. As the last Korvathi vessel disappeared into hyperspace, the bridge of the Indomitable erupted in cheers. But Marcus remained focused on the tactical display, already planning their next move. This victory was significant, but it was only the beginning. Lieutenant Kim turned to him with excitement evident in her voice. "Sir, what are our orders?" Marcus looked around his bridge, seeing the faces of humans who had chosen to face impossible odds because they believed in something greater than themselves. He thought about Elena Vasquez and her ancient sword, about the choice between survival and principle, about the kind of galaxy they wanted to leave for future generations. "Set course for the Kepler 442 system," he said finally. "It's time to visit the site of the colony the Korvathi destroyed, and send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we need volunteers. Lots of them." "Sir," Dr. Reyes looked puzzled. "What are we going to do at Kepler 442? Marcus smiled, and it was an expression that would have worried Warprime Kethera if he had seen it. "We're going to build something the Korvathi have never seen before, a monument that fights back." As the Indomitable jumped to hyperspace, carrying with it the proof that the mighty Korvathi Empire could be beaten, signals spread across the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had lived in fear of the Empire's expansion began to hope. And on Earth, recruitment centers found themselves overwhelmed with volunteers eager to join humanity's growing fleet. The Dragon had been in respect, but it was learning that humans had a dangerous habit of standing back up stronger than before. The war for the galaxy's future was far from over, but For the first time in 3 centuries, the Korvathi Empire faced an enemy that refused to accept defeat. And, somewhere in the void between stars, the ghost of Elena Vasquez smiled. 2 years after the Battle of the Outer Rim, the Kepler 442 system had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. Where once a peaceful colony had been reduced to glass and ash by Korvathi bombardment, now stood a fortress unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Sarah Chun, promoted after her brother's heroic stand against War Prime Kethera, stood on the observation deck of the massive space station that had become known throughout the galaxy as Defiance Base. Through the reinforced transparisteel, she could see the constant stream of ships arriving from every corner of known space. Human vessels, certainly, but also Zephyrian light cruisers, Thrix hive ships, Vorthak battle cruisers, and dozens of other species that had once cowered before Korvathi might. "Admiral, the final sensor arrays are coming online," reported Commander Jackson, her tactical officer. "We now have complete coverage of the entire system." Sarah nodded, watching as the last of the massive defensive platforms moved into position. Kepler 442 had been chosen for more than symbolic reasons. Its position at the intersection of 3 major hyperspace routes made it a strategic choke point. Any Korvathi fleet moving toward the core worlds would have to pass through this system. "What's our total strength?" she asked. 412 vessels from 17 different species, Jackson replied, consulting his datapad. "But more arriving daily. The Nebulans just sent word that they're dispatching their entire third fleet." Sarah shook her head in amazement. 3 years ago, most of these species had never coordinated military operations with anyone, let alone with the upstart humans. Now, they were willingly placing their fleets under human command, united by something that transcended politics or territorial disputes. The chime of the communications system interrupted her thoughts. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. Admiral Martinez wants to speak with you personally." "Put him through." The holographic image of Fleet Admiral Rodriguez Martinez materialized in the center of the command center. Despite the distance between Earth and Kepler 442, the quantum entanglement communicators developed by the joint human-Zephyrian research teams made real-time conversation possible across vast distances. "Sarah," Martinez said without preamble, "we've received intelligence that concerns you directly. War Prime Kethera has been recalled to the Korvathi home system." "Recalled?" Sarah frowned. "For what purpose?" "Our sources suggest he's been summoned before the Empire's High Council. Apparently, his repeated failures against human forces have not gone unnoticed." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Korvathi High Council was composed of the Empire's most ancient and powerful members, beings who had overseen the conquest of half the galaxy. If they were taking a personal interest in the human situation, it meant the conflict was about to escalate dramatically. "There's more," Martinez continued. "Our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive fleet movements throughout Korvathi space. They're consolidating their forces for what appears to be a final offensive against the human worlds. How long do we have?" "Best estimates suggest 6 months before they're ready to move." "But Sarah," Martinez's expression grew grave. "This won't be like the raids and skirmishes we've been fighting. They're bringing everything, their entire battle fleet, their experimental weapons systems, even some technologies our scientists have never seen before." Sarah looked around the command center, seeing the faces of humans and aliens working side by side. They had achieved something miraculous here, a true alliance based on shared principles rather than mutual convenience. But would it be enough against the full might of the Korvathi Empire? "Admiral, what are your orders?" she asked. "Hold the line, Sarah. That's all any of us can do. Hold the line and make them pay for every inch." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in tense silence. Sarah looked out at the ships assembled around Defiance Base, representing the hopes and dreams of billions of beings who had chosen to stand against tyranny. "Commander Jackson," she said finally, "signal all fleet commanders. We're holding a strategic conference in 1 hour." As the various commanders assembled in the base's main briefing room, Sarah was struck by the sheer diversity of the group. Admiral Christensen of the Earth Defense Force sat beside WarClan leader Thraksh of the Vorthak Stellar Navy. The ethereal Queen Mother of the Nebulans floated next to the crystalline form of High Resonance Zalith of the Zephyrian Harmonic Fleet. Most remarkably, they all wore the same expression of grim determination. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," Sarah began, "I'll be direct. The Korvathi Empire is mobilizing for what they clearly intend to be their final offensive against our alliance. Intelligence suggests they plan to crush human resistance once and for all, and make an example of any species that has supported us." The room erupted in a variety of sounds, clicks, growls, harmonic chimes, and gaseous swirls that nevertheless all conveyed the same basic sentiment. They had been expecting this. "The question before us," Sarah continued, "is simple. Do we try to meet them in open battle, or do we force them to come to us here at Defiance Base?" WarClan leader Thraksh was the first to speak, his leonine features set in a predatory grin. "Let them come to us. The Vorthak have never been ones to retreat from a worthy fight." "Agreed," chimed High Resonance Zalith. "Our defensive preparations here represent months of joint effort. To abandon them now would be wasteful." But it was the Thrift Queen speaker who raised the crucial point. "Admiral Chun, with respect, the Korvathi have never been successfully resisted by a defensive strategy. Their standard tactic is to overwhelm fixed positions with superior firepower." "That's true," Sarah admitted. "But they've also never faced a defense like this. We're not just relying on firepower. We're counting on something they've never had to deal with before." "Which is?" asked Admiral Christensen. Sarah smiled, and it was an expression that would have reminded anyone present of her brother Marcus. "Unity." She activated the holographic display in the center of the room, showing the complete defensive grid they had constructed around Kepler 442. "Every species in this alliance has contributed something unique to our defenses. The Zephyrians provided the harmonic resonance technology that can disrupt Korvathi bioarmor. The Thrix developed swarm tactics that can overwhelm their targeting systems. The Vorthak created boarding protocols that can breach their ships once their defenses are down." The display shifted, showing the complex layered defenses surrounding the system. But the most important contribution came from humanity itself. The understanding that some things are worth dying for. "Pretty words," rumbled Thraksh, "but the Korvathi will bring overwhelming force. How do we hold against odds of 10 to 1 or worse?" "We don't fight their kind of battle," Sarah replied. "We fight ours." She activated another set of displays, showing the detailed schematics that have been developed over the past 2 years. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce the Elena Vasquez Defense Protocol." The room fell silent as the implications of what they were seeing became clear. The entire Kepler 442 system had been turned into a massive trap, not designed to stop the Korvathi fleet, but to draw it in and then spring shut around it. "The outer sensor grid will detect their approach and feed targeting data to the deep space weapon platforms," Sarah explained. "These aren't designed to stop them. They're designed to channel them towards specific entry points where we can control their approach vectors." Admiral Christensen leaned forward, studying the displays intently. "And once they're committed to their attack routes, Phase 2 begins. The resonance weapons will start degrading their bioarmor while our mobile fleets harass their flanks. We make them fight for every AU of space, bleeding them slowly while drawing them deeper into the system." "And Phase 3, asked the Queen Mother of the Nebulans, her gaseous form swirling with anticipation. Sarah's smile became predatory. "We spring the trap. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt are fusion mines. Thousands of them, each one programmed with Korvathi ship signatures. When their fleet reaches optimal position," she didn't need to finish the sentence. The assembled commanders could see the devastating potential of the plan. It was audacious, risky, and completely dependent on perfect timing and coordination between dozens of species that had never worked together before. There's one more thing, Sarah added. This plan requires someone to remain at the center of the trap, coordinating the timing and ensuring the Korvathi commit fully to their attack. The implications were clear. Defiance Base itself would become the bait, and whoever remained to trigger the trap would likely not survive to see the victory. I volunteer, said WarClan leader Thraksh immediately. As do I, chimed High Resonant Zalith. And the Thrix Collective, added the Queen's speaker. Within moments, every commander in the room had volunteered to remain at the center of the trap. Sarah felt a surge of emotion that she struggled to control. These beings, representing species that had spent centuries focusing on their own survival, were now willing to sacrifice themselves for the shared ideal of resistance against tyranny. Thank you, she said simply. All of you. But the coordination requirements mean this needs to be handled by a single command structure. Defiance Base will remain, and I'll be staying to oversee the final phase. Absolutely not, Admiral Christensen said firmly. Sarah, you're needed to coordinate the overall defense. We can't risk losing you in the trap. With respect, Admiral, Sarah replied, this isn't just about military strategy. It's about what Elena Vasquez showed us at Harmony Station. Sometimes the most important battles aren't won by surviving, but by proving that some principles are worth any sacrifice. The debate continued for hours, but eventually the various commanders accepted what Sarah had known from the beginning. The Elena Vasquez defense protocol would require exactly the kind of noble sacrifice that had inspired the galaxy's resistance in the first place. As the conference ended and the commanders returned to their fleets, Sarah found herself alone on the observation deck once again. The stream of arriving ships continued, but now she saw them differently. Each vessel represented beings who had chosen courage over comfort, principle over safety. Admiral, Commander Jackson's voice came over the intercom. We're receiving a transmission from the outer sensor grid. Multiple hyperspace signatures inbound. Configuration matches Korvathi fleet formations. Sarah straightened, feeling the familiar calm that came before battle. How long until they reach the system? 18 hours at their current speed. Admiral, it's bigger than we expected. Our computers are having trouble getting an accurate count, but preliminary estimates suggest over 2,000 vessels. 2,000 ships. Sarah felt the weight of that number, but also something else, anticipation. For too long, the galaxy had lived in fear of Korvathi might. Today, that fear would end, one way or another. Signal all commands, she ordered. The Elena Vasquez defense protocol is now in effect. All personnel not essential to final operations should evacuate to the outer systems. Ma'am, Jackson said quietly. Most of the volunteer crews are requesting to remain. Sarah smiled. Of course they were. They had learned the same lesson Elena Vasquez had taught, that some things were worth more than survival. Very well, Commander. Signal the fleet. Message begins. Today we hold the line, not just for our own worlds, but for the idea that free beings have the right to determine their own destiny. The Korvathi come with overwhelming force, believing that might makes right. We stand here to prove them wrong. Whatever happens in the next day, remember that you fight not just as humans or Zephyrians or Thrix or any single species. You fight as free beings united by the belief that courage and principle matter more than survival. She paused, looking out at the assembled fleet one last time. Message ends. All stations, prepare for battle. In the depths of space, War Prime Kethera stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the sensor readings from the Kepler 442 system. The human base was clearly visible, as were the defensive fleets arrayed around it. It seemed like such a small force to stand against the might of the Korvathi Empire. But he had learned to respect human unpredictability. They had surprised him before with their willingness to choose death over surrender, their ability to find weaknesses in seemingly invincible Korvathi technology, and, most of all, their talent for inspiring other species to join their hopeless cause. War Prime, his tactical officer reported, the High Council has confirmed our orders. Complete annihilation of all resistance forces. No prisoners, no merci. Kethra nodded grimly. The High Council had made it clear that this battle would determine the future of the galaxy. If humanity and its allies were crushed here, the other species would finally accept the inevitable dominance of the Korvathi Empire. But if the humans somehow managed to inflict significant damage, he pushed that thought aside. The fleet at his command represented the accumulated might of 3 centuries of conquest. 2,000 vessels, each one a masterpiece of bioengineering and destructive capability. Against such force, even human stubbornness would prove inadequate. "Begin the attack," he ordered. "And remember, we fight not just for conquest, but for the very principle that strength determines right. The galaxy will learn today that resistance to the Empire is futile." As the massive Korvathi fleet began its final approach to Kepler 442, beings across the galaxy held their breath. On Earth, people gathered in public squares to watch the news feeds. On Zephyr Prime, crystalline forms resonated with harmonies of hope and fear. Throughout the Thrix Collective, genetic memories were updated with new patterns of courage and defiance. The battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy was about to begin, and at its center stood a human admiral who had learned that sometimes the greatest victories required the greatest sacrifices. The dragon was coming in all its terrible might, but it would find that humans had taught the galaxy a new way to bare their teeth. The Battle of Kepler 442 began not with a thunderous clash of mighty fleets, but with silence. Admiral Sarachan watched from Defiance Base as the massive Korvathi armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. 2,000 vessels, their biohulls pulsing with otherworldly light, arranged in perfect formation like some vast organism preparing to devour its prey. For a moment, even she felt the weight of despair that had crushed so many civilizations before her. Then, she remembered Elena Vasquez, standing alone with nothing but an ancient sword and the courage to defy the inevitable. She remembered her brother Marcus, facing impossible odds with a smile and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. She remembered every volunteer who had chosen to stay at Defiance Base, knowing they would likely never see home again. "All stations, this is Admiral Chun," she broadcast across the Alliance fleet. "Phase 1 of the Elena Vasquez defense protocol is now in effect. Let them come." The outer sensor grid lit up as the Korvathi fleet began its approach. Their formation was textbook perfect, a massive wall of battleships advancing in waves, with lighter vessels on the flanks and their most powerful dreadnoughts held in reserve. War Prime Kethra was taking no chances this time. "Distance to outer weapon platforms?" Sarah asked. 400,000 kilometers and closing, reported Commander Jackson. "Their scout ships are probing our defenses. Let them see exactly what we want them to see. Activate the decoy generators." Throughout the asteroid belt, carefully hidden holographic projectors came online, creating the illusion of weapon platforms and defensive installations that existed only as light and electromagnetic signatures. The Korvathi would detect what appeared to be a massive defensive grid, one that would channel their advance into precisely the approach vectors the Alliance needed. The first shots of the battle came from the Korvathi scouts, probing attacks against the outermost sensor stations. The human-built platforms returned fire, but their weapons seemed pitifully inadequate against Korvathi bioarmor. One by one, the outer stations fell silent, exactly as planned. "They're taking the bait," Jackson reported. "The main fleet is adjusting course to avoid the fake weapon platforms." Sarah nodded, watching the tactical display as thousands of red dots began flowing toward the system's inner planets. The Korvathi advance was being channeled into 3 narrow corridors, each one perfectly positioned for the Alliance's real defensive systems. Signal Phase 2. All fleet commanders begin harassing attacks. The Alliance fleet had been positioned not to stop the Korvathi advance, but to slow it down and force them to commit to their chosen attack vectors. Zephyrian light cruisers darted in from impossible angles, their harmonic weapons causing localized failures in Korvathi bioarmor. Thrick's hive ships released swarms of drone fighters that confused enemy targeting systems. Vorthack battle cruisers performed hit-and-run attacks that forced the enemy to maintain defensive formations. Warprime Kethra watched the early skirmishes with growing frustration. The Alliance fleet was fighting like insects, darting into sting, then retreating before his forces could bring their superior firepower to bear. It was irritating but ultimately ineffective. His fleet was suffering minimal losses while steadily advancing toward their target. Warprime, his tactical officer, reported, "The enemy fleet is withdrawing toward the inner system. Their defensive stations appear to be less numerous than our initial estimate suggested." Kethra studied the tactical displays. The human defensive grid looked formidable, but not insurmountable. More concerning was the way the Alliance forces were fighting, with perfect coordination despite representing dozens of different species. 3 years ago, half of these races had been too proud or too fearful to work together. Now, they moved like parts of a single organism. "Maintain advance," he ordered, "but remain alert for human trickery." As the Korvathi fleet penetrated deeper into the system, the Alliance harassment increased. What had begun as pinprick attacks became concentrated assaults on individual ships. The harmonic resonance weapons that had been developed from Elena Vasquez's sacrifice were taking their toll. Korvathi bioarmor that had seemed invulnerable was now showing signs of systematic degradation. But for every Korvathi vessel damaged or destroyed, the Alliance lost 3 ships. The mathematics of the battle were inexorable. Superior numbers and firepower would eventually overwhelm courage and determination. "Admiral," Commander Jackson's voice carried a note of concern. "We're losing ships faster than projected. At this rate, we won't have enough fleet strength remaining for Phase 3. Sarah looked at the casualty reports streaming across her display. Good beings were dying out there. Humans and aliens who had chosen to stand against tyranny. Each loss was a personal tragedy, but also a necessary sacrifice for the larger strategy. "Signal all commanders," she said. "Begin Phase 3 early. All remaining fleet elements fall back to final defensive positions." Throughout the asteroid belt, the Alliance's surviving ships took position around what appeared to be the system's last line of defense. A ring of weapon platforms and military installations protecting the approach to Kepler 442's inner planets. To Korvathi sensors, it looked like a desperate last stand. It was, in fact, the moment they had all been working toward. Warprime Kethra felt a surge of satisfaction as his fleet penetrated the inner system. The Alliance's resistance had been fierce, but ultimately futile. His forces had sustained losses, yes, but nothing that would prevent them from completing their mission. Soon, the human base at Defiance would be reduced to atoms, and, with it, the galaxy's last hope of resistance. "All vessels, prepare for final assault," he broadcast. "Today we end this rebellion forever." The Korvathi fleet moved into attack formation, the most powerful weapons charging for the bombardment that would reduce Defiance base to space dust. 2,000 ships, the accumulated might of the galaxy's most successful empire, focused their destructive power on a single target. They never saw the trap closing around them. "All stations, this is Admiral Chun," Sarah's voice echoed across the Alliance fleet. Elena Vasquez proved that courage matters more than survival. "Today, we prove that sometimes courage is enough to win." Phase 4, execute. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt, thousands of fusion mines that had been disguised as ordinary space debris suddenly activated. Each one had been programmed with specific Korvathi ship signatures, and each one had been waiting patiently for the enemy fleet to reach optimal position. The mines didn't just explode, they erupted in a carefully choreographed symphony of destruction that turned the inner system into a killing field. Korvathi vessels that had seemed invincible found themselves trapped in a web of nuclear fire. Their bioarmor, already weakened by months of harmonic bombardment, proved inadequate against the massive energy release. But the mines were only the beginning. "Now," Sarah commanded. Every weapon platform, Every hidden installation, every remaining Alliance ship opened fire simultaneously. The attack came not from in front of the Korvathi fleet, where they expected it, but from all sides, above, below, and behind. The asteroid belt itself had been turned into a weapon, with carefully positioned railguns and particle beam arrays that had been hidden among the space rocks. War Prime Kethera watched in horror as his mighty fleet began to come apart around him. Ships that had conquered star systems were being torn apart by weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate their defenses. The perfect formation that had been the Korvathi's strength became a liability as vessels collided with each other in their desperate attempts to escape the trap. "This is impossible," he roared, his four arms gesticulating wildly. "Our armor should protect us. Our numbers should be overwhelming." War Prime, his tactical officer's voice was steady despite the chaos around them. "The humans have turned our own strength against us. By drawing us into this position, they've negated our numerical advantage and concentrated our forces in a killing field." Through the view screen, Kethera could see Defiance Base in the distance, its weapons adding to the devastating crossfire. But more importantly, he could see something that chilled him to his core. The base wasn't running. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, despite facing the entire might of the Korvathi Empire, the humans and their allies were standing and fighting. "Signal all vessels," he commanded. "Emergency scatter, break formation, and retreat to hyperspace." But it was too late. The trap had been designed not just to damage the Korvathi fleet, but to prevent its escape. Hidden gravity generators throughout the asteroid belt were creating localized space distortions that made hyperspace jumps impossible. The Empire's forces were trapped, forced to fight their way out through the same killing field that had already cost them half their strength. On Defiance Base, Sarah watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The plan was working better than their most optimistic projections. The Korvathi fleet, which had seemed invincible just hours before, was being systematically dismantled by the combined efforts of dozens of species working in perfect coordination. "Admiral," Commander Jackson reported, "enemy fleet strength is down to 60% and falling. Their flagship is trying to break out through the outer perimeter." "Let them go," Sarah said. "We've made our point." But even as she spoke, she knew the battle wasn't over. The Korvathi Empire was vast, and this fleet represented only a fraction of their total strength. More would come, and next time they would be prepared for human trickery. The real victory wasn't the destruction of ships or the death of enemies. It was the proof that the Korvathi could be beaten. Every being in the galaxy would know that the mighty Empire had been humbled by an alliance of species they had considered inferior. War Prime Kethera's flagship limped away from the battle with its bioarmor in ruins and its crew in shock. Of the 2,000 vessels he had brought to Kepler, 442, fewer than 300 remained capable of hyperspace travel. The rest were debris, adding to the memorial that had already existed in this system. But more than ships had been lost. The myth of Korvathi invincibility was gone forever. War Prime, his communications officer reported, were receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Multiple species are declaring independence from the Empire. The hegemony of Cole, the stellar commonwealth, even some of our own client races are rising in rebellion. Kethera slumped in his command chair, feeling the weight of 3 centuries of conquest crumbling around him. The Empire had been built on fear and the assumption that all intelligent life would eventually submit to superior force. But the humans had taught the galaxy that some things were worth more than survival. On Defiance Base, Sarah stood on the observation deck, looking out at the expanding debris field that had once been the Empire's grand fleet. The cost had been terrible. Nearly half the Alliance fleet had been destroyed, and thousands of brave beings would never see home again. But their sacrifice had achieved something that would echo across the galaxy for generations. "Admiral," Commander Jackson joined her at the viewport. "We're receiving messages from across known space. The Rigel Confederacy wants to join the Alliance. The Centauri Republic is offering military support. Even some core Vathi client species are requesting protection while they declare independence. Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on something else. A small piece of debris floating past the viewport. It was a fragment of what had once been a core Vathi dreadnought, its bioarmor scorched and lifeless. But more than that, it was a symbol of the change that was sweeping across the galaxy. "Commander," she said quietly, "draft a message to Earth Command. Tell them the Elena Vasquez defense protocol was successful, but our work is just beginning. The galaxy is free to choose its own destiny now, but freedom requires vigilance. And the Korvathi Empire?" Sarah smiled, and it was an expression that carried all the determination of her species. The stubborn refusal to accept defeat, the willingness to stand against impossible odds, the understanding that some principles were worth any sacrifice. "The Korvathi will try again," she said. "They'll adapt, they'll learn, they'll bring new weapons and new tactics. But they'll never again face a galaxy that accepts their dominion as inevitable. Every species out there now knows that the Empire can be beaten." She turned away from the viewport, already planning the next phase of humanity's expansion into the galaxy. There would be new challenges, new enemies, new tests of courage and determination. But there would also be new allies, new friends, new species learning that freedom was not just possible, but worth fighting for. In the years that followed, the Battle of Kepler 442 would become legend. Bards would sing of the day the galaxy stood together against tyranny. Historians would analyze the tactical brilliance of the Elena Vasquez defense protocol. Children of a dozen species would play games where they pretended to be brave alliance fighters standing against impossible odds. But for those who had been there, who had seen the Korvathi Empire humbled and the galaxy's spirit reborn, the most important lesson was simpler. Sometimes, when faced with overwhelming darkness, the only response is to light a candle and refuse to let it be extinguished. The human had raised her sword, and the dragon had bent in respect. But more than that, the dragon had learned that respect, once lost, must be earned anew. And in a galaxy where beings of courage and principle stood together, even the mightiest empire could be brought low by the simple refusal to surrender. The age of Korvathi dominance was ending. The age of freedom had begun. And at its heart, carried forward by humans and aliens alike, burned the memory of Elena Vasquez, a commander who had chosen courage over survival and taught the galaxy that some things were worth more than life itself. The dragon had been in respect, but it was the galaxy that had learned to stand tall.